So I found this video called 25 Proofs God Exists. Irrefutable! Yeah, I guess it must be irrefutable. I mean, there's 25 of them. Tell yourself some kind of a joke about quantity and quality and let's get going.
We are defining God as a being or beings that created the world before us from nothing.
Interesting right off the bat before we even get to any of the points. Created the world from nothing? Is that possible even? What is nothing? Is it even a state that is possible in reality? Can something be created from it? I mean, I hear all the time from religious people that nothing can come from nothing. And I have to say, I'm kind of inclined to agree, tentatively at least. And I think a lot of non-religiously minded people are, including scientists. Which is why I usually find it really confusing when religious apologists try to put this dichotomy forward of either God created something out of nothing, or nothing created something out of nothing. I don't think something out of nothing, at least in the absolute sense it's typically used in these conversations, is something that's ever been demonstrated to have happened or to even be possible to have happened. And yet it's always put forward as the only possible option. Something came out of nothing, whether God did it or not. I refuse to grant that as some sort of obvious starting point when no effort whatsoever has ever been made to demonstrate it, or the possibility of it.
Let's start off with proof number 1, the atom. It's the essence of logic to say that when there is an effect, there is a cause that was capable of causing that effect. If the effect is, let's say, a particle accelerator, we must say that it was caused by a highly intelligent person.
It's not that we must say that, it's that we will say that. We know what a particle accelerator is, we know where it comes from, and barring some wild new discovery, there's no reason for us to think that there's some other means by which particle accelerators would come into existence. The explanation we already have, which is that humans build them, is sufficient. And to start positing that some sort of force of nature would pull particle accelerators together, or that there's some sort of evolutionary process that leads to particle accelerators, is really just overcomplicating the issue. Occam's razor excludes all of this.
When we talk about the particle inside the particle accelerator, the atom, and we realize no human being can create something as small, powerful, and complex as an atom.
Complex is a very strange word to come up with when you're talking about an atom. By definition, an atom is one of the least complex material objects in existence. Aside from subatomic particles, I have a hard time thinking of anything less complex.
That it must have been caused by a being far more intelligent than the scientists.
No. I mean, yeah, we can be reasonably sure that atoms in general were not caused by scientists, but there's also nothing to indicate atoms were caused by anyone else. I mean, aside from the fact that different atoms are manufactured by stars, the basic structure of an atom seems to be something that would naturally emerge from the fundamental forces of nature towards the start of the Big Bang. The strong force, the weak force, and the electromagnetic force. When nature itself appears to pull things into this structure, I don't really see a need to posit some kind of a person doing something, any more than I see a need to posit some person pushing the planets around. So really all we have here is some form of God of the gaps where there's not really that much of a gap left. The amount of a gap that's left here is kind of equivalent to if you look at lightning and you say, yeah, okay, electricity and all that, but the electricity is really controlled by Thor, because he still needs somebody to make the decision that it's going to work that way. Well, okay, have fun playing your little games, but I don't really see the point.
And that's what a lot of people are referring to as God. And since everything is made of atoms, proof of God is the very fabric of existence.
Right, so the argument is atoms have to be made by someone because I said so, that someone has to be much smarter than a scientist because I said so, and because supposedly atoms are complex somehow. Anyone smarter than a scientist is God because I said so, therefore atoms are proof of God because I said so. Okay, whatever.
Proof number 2, the synchronicity of nature. The mineral world, the vegetative world, and the animal world.
What is this, 20 questions? Mineral, vegetable, or animal? For real though, are we stuck with Linnaeus forever? Dude died like 250 years ago. How about we try to move on a little here?
All work together seamlessly. One eats the other breathes the other's exhaust. They change color based on the season or the environment. We can watch thousands of hours of nature shows and still not grasp even a sliver of the majesty of nature.
So to summarize that a little more clearly, I think the basic point is nature achieves some kind of a balance. Okay, well, so far that's exactly what would be expected by evolutionary biology. Except in the mineral world.
If creation is fueled by random events, there would be no such harmony.
Okay, well, to be clear, natural selection is not random. But if you really want to characterize it that way, even though it's a lie, okay, fine. Why? Why would you not expect that? Life expands to fill the available opportunities. If there's a niche, someone's going to take it. If there's all of a sudden a massive increase in the number of herbivore animals, you're likely to see an increase in predators preying on them. Or if you don't, you're likely to see those herbivores eat way too much and end up with not enough food left over, and then their population will decline. If the land gets covered with plants that consume carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, you're likely to see more success in organisms that can make use of that oxygen. If changing color based on the season or the environment, as you say, is somehow useful for survival, more animals that do that are going to survive, and you're going to see more of that. This is not something that requires some kind of intention to happen. It's a mathematical inevitability in a world with scarce resources. Those who are well adapted, those who can survive well in the world as it is, or in the small part of the world that they're in, as it is, are more likely to propagate than the ones who aren't. And so inevitably, nature finds a balance. Populations that go way too far in one direction or another are punished. Not by someone who wants to punish them, but just by the facts of life. Imbalances are always corrected in the end, although of course that pendulum might swing further than it should, but then that will be corrected too. So that guarantees there will always be imbalance, but it will always be being pulled back towards balance. And that's the funny thing, you characterize nature as being totally balanced and perfect, but it's absolutely not. Imbalance happens all the time. That's kind of the nature of how and why life changes. It's just that the pressure of time and resource limitations are against those particular imbalances. So yeah, I really don't understand why you feel the need to present nature in this obviously false way as perfectly harmonious and balanced.
Therefore, these events are happening, by contrast, on purpose by the creator of nature, which is what a lot of people are calling God.
I'm getting the impression that false dichotomies will be a regular feature in this video.
Proof number 3. Tradition from Adam, our family tree. What is history? Is not a huge part of history the testimony of men handed down from one generation to the next, like Josephus?
Oh no, is this going to be Adam and Eve are real because the Bible says so? And before anybody comments and says, but he's a Jew and they don't call it the Bible, yeah, he calls it the Bible. He'll call it the Bible at least one time that I remember in this video, so don't bother commenting that.
What is genealogy? Is it not the science of being able to trace back our lineage to the Bible?
See, told you so.
And therefore, ultimately, to the first man?
No, genealogy is not the science of tracing your lineage back to the Bible and the first man. No. It is figuring out your family lineage, yeah, but that doesn't imply that your family lineage is going to link up to the Bible or the first man, or that there ever was a first man.
And aren't the stories surrounding these human beings also part of genealogy?
Possibly. I mean, you'd have to figure out if these people existed, if their family trees as presented are accurate, how they actually link up through the ensuing centuries to you, if it's your genealogy you're talking about. And as for a lot of it, especially the really early stuff, there's really no reason to take it as anything more than legend. I mean, Adam and Eve, people made out of dust 6,000 years ago. And yes, as far as I can tell, this guy is a young Earth creationist, just to be clear. We'll hear the thousands of years figure in a bit. But yeah, whether the Bible says Adam and Eve existed or not, reality says otherwise. And so it's a big old pile of bullshit. It's a myth. It's a story people told each other about how they thought the world came to be. That doesn't mean it's true.
Well, our historic record that's been handed down by the Jews, aka the 3 million strong witness nation, is that the Bible is a true revelation from God.
So the Bible has stories where stuff happened to a lot of different people, and because the stories say it happened to a lot of different people, that makes it more likely to be true? No, sorry. That's the same as when the Christians point to that bit in the New Testament where Jesus got up and walked around and 500 people saw him. Well, I mean, if the Bible says there's 500 witnesses to the resurrection, that's gotta make it true, right? So you're a Christian now, I suppose. I mean, the story says it's true.
That revelation tells us a lot of history, and among that history is that Adam was the first man.
Wait. Are you saying that there's 3 million eyewitnesses to Adam being the first man? Where the hell were they?
And since stories surrounding genealogy are also part of genealogy, we must say the account of the Bible that God created Adam is true.
So any story surrounding any genealogical claim has to be true. So the Japanese emperors have to be the descendants of the goddess Amaterasu. Romulus and Remus really were the sons of the god Mars. Odysseus actually existed and was the great-grandson of Hermes. And Jesus really was literally the son of God after he knocked up Mary. Because any story around genealogy has to be true.
This is a part of all of our family trees. If you trace back your lineage, if you're able to trace it back far enough, you will wind up tracing it back to the Bible, which will trace it back to Adam, which will trace it back to God. So God is part of your family tree.
If you trace back your family tree far enough that it fades into myth and legend and hearsay, if you're able to, then you'll believe that myths and legends are part of your family tree. And this proves that God exists.
We have a tradition from Sinai. Number 4, the more consistent eyewitnesses you have to an event, the more likely it is that it happened. If that's the case, the most well-proven event in history is the revelation of God at the giving of the Bible on the 6th of the Hebrew month of Sivan on the year 1313 from creation in front of 2.5 million Jews.
Didn't you already kind of do that one? Like the Bible says a lot of Jews witnessed a thing, and therefore it's true that they actually did, and it's not just a story. I could swear we've already done this, and we're only at number 4 here. But I guess technically it was never really a point on its own, so okay.
Even today, you can ask any Jew's grandfather or great-grandfather whether he believed in the revelation at Sinai, and they will tell you that they do. And that's probably because it actually happened.
So the point isn't really that the story says 2.5 million people witnessed God talking and stuff. The point is, ask my grandpa and he'll tell you he believes it. Okay, well, I asked my grandpa and he doesn't. So I guess now it's down to 50-50. Although my grandpa's not a Jew, so I guess it doesn't count, right? We only want to ask people within the relevant religion whether they believe that religion's true. And if the majority of people who believe the thing say they believe the thing, wow, well, how could it not be true then? It's interesting, though, that you specify that you have to ask any Jew's grandpa. Why not just say any Jew? Well, I think those of us who've talked to a lot of Jews about religion can probably start to guess why. Atheism is an awfully big thing among Jews nowadays. Wait another couple generations and I'm not sure the ask my grandpa argument is going to look so appealing, especially outside of Israel.
Your DNA. Your DNA could stretch from the earth to the sun and back 600 times.
That's probably at least not far off. A few feet of DNA per cell if you uncoiled all of it and stretched it out. A few tens of trillions of cells in your body. Yeah, it adds up fast. It's probably at least around kind of the right order of magnitude.
And we're all 99.9% alike. And the human genome contains 3 billion base pairs of DNA.
Okay, so humans are similar and also numbers are big. I'm with you so far.
Did DNA, with all the above qualities, just evolve on its own?
Not with the scare quotes, no.
The suggestion is ludicrous.
I would like to hear you explain what the suggestion actually is that you think is ludicrous. Because the way you presented it there, it just evolved on its own, is kind of a red flag to me that you might not know what we're actually talking about here.
It is far more plausible that DNA came about by way of a being that's more intelligent and more precise than any human being alive today or ever. And some might call that God.
So this is kind of similar to the God of the no real gaps with the atom, except probably even sillier because here we have an actual explanation that's been pretty much nailed down. And it's a really strange way of putting forth this kind of argument as well, because the issue doesn't seem to be just with natural selection. It seems to be much more about the length of the DNA molecule, the number of base pairs it contains, the total amount of length of DNA molecules across all cells put together in the average human body, as if this somehow negates the effectiveness of genes and proteins and cell division and mutation and natural selection. As if the numbers were smaller, then it would be believable as a natural process. You know, if there was only a single-celled organism with a small amount of genetic material, or a very simple multicellular organism like Caenorhabditis elegans, that every single cell division that occurs in its development has been mapped and understood. Then you can wrap your head around it, but if you have a more complex multicellular organism with, instead of something like 1,000 cells, many, many trillions of cells, all of a sudden it's a problem. No, sorry, throwing big numbers in my face is not going to make me abandon the elegant simplicity of natural selection in favor of a far more complicated and far less explained answer, which is God did it.
Number 6, the planets revolving, the prime mover.
Oh, we're going back to Aristotle, huh? Okay, let's go.
The planets are moving. We can all see that. Anything moving has a mover. So what was the mover?
Anything moving has a mover. So what was the mover? Okay, define mover. I think you mean more generally something that causes an effect, right?
The Big Bang Well, what was the mover for the Big Bang?
Exactly. So the real question is what caused anything to happen in the first place? And there's a lot of ways to approach this question, one of which would be that you're approaching the entire concept from your human perspective, which is that on the macro scale, things happen as the result of other things that happen. But does this actually really apply on the smallest possible scales? And more importantly, does it actually apply in a situation so outside our experience as before the universe as we know it, whatever that happens to mean? Is it possible to have a reality where nothing happens? Is that even a thing that can exist? Is it possible for there to be a lack of physical reality? No quantum fluctuations, no nothing. Is it possible for there to be a before the universe? Does it even make sense to say there's anything to move? Does it even make sense to say that there was a start to the universe? That time began? That the universe began, that physical reality has a boundary in the way you're thinking about it. Is this true? I'm going to have to believe this is true before I go looking for a reason why it's true, right? But as far as I can tell, cosmology is not advanced enough to know that. It may never be. There are hypotheses, certainly. There are theoretical understandings of how the universe works, which lead to certain answers, but that's within that theoretical context. And humanity isn't even at the stage yet where we can unify quantum theory and general relativity, which of course is going to be required for any sort of explanation that we can accept with serious confidence. Until then, it's all just kind of up in the air. There's no real answer. If we don't even fully understand yet how the features of reality that we see around us fit together fully, how are we supposed to talk about anything like before the universe? Except as a hypothetical, an interesting mathematical model, something like that. And that's not to run any of that down. The only way to reach the correct answer is to try to get there through some means, and this is the means by which you do it. But I don't think any serious physicist or cosmologist would have the arrogance to suggest that they know the answer. If you read what these people write, take Stephen Hawking or whoever you like, they're not talking with certainty by any stretch, because they know that we don't know the answers, and they're okay with that. They're working on it. It's a project that's underway. Nobody expects to just solve every single problem immediately, especially problems like this, which are some of the hardest ones there are. So we're in an area of discussion here where any honest person is going to acknowledge an awful lot of uncertainty. And then there are the religious people who just say, oh yeah, I know the answer. The universe had to have a beginning, and before that there had to be nothing, and also there was a guy there who didn't need any sort of a cause or reason to exist, and he just did it, and there doesn't need to be any sort of explanation of how that works or anything. Yeah, that's the answer, so shut up. No thanks. That's about as uncompelling and uninteresting as answers can possibly get. I know people are uncomfortable with uncertainty, with not understanding what the universe is, why we're here, how we're here. I get that if you allow yourself to be really worried about these questions, they can be worrying, but an answer like that doesn't address anything. It doesn't fix the problem. It's just finding an excuse to ignore the question.
The atheist is forced to say, against logic, that there isn't a need for a prime mover of the material of the Big Bang.
Well, you say there isn't a need for a prime mover of the movement of God. And I know it's a little cliched to say, well, what caused God? But how can you sit there and say with no evidence, no justification whatsoever, just assertion that physical reality and events within it need some sort of a cause, but the God thing doesn't? I can just as easily say I don't think physical reality needs a cause. Quantum vacuum fluctuations, whatever, they don't need a cause. Period. They are fundamental reality. They're the unmoved mover. They don't need a cause. They don't need any sort of a reason. They just happen and they led to the Big Bang. I can say that just as easily as you can say your thing doesn't need a cause. I'm not going to, because I don't know. But then again, if you're going to dishonestly claim this level of knowledge and claim that what you made up about the origin of the universe makes you right, why should I not do that? I don't think that it'd make me right, but it certainly would not make me any more likely to be wrong than you. In fact, I think I'd be more likely to be right because at least I'm proposing one less thing. And the thing I'm proposing are things that we actually know exist. Frankly, that makes me way more likely to be right than you are.
The believer rightly says there is a prime mover, which itself did not need to be moved. That's really the only logical way to explain this situation we have in front of us.
What is the situation we have in front of us? Meaning, what is the actual nature of the entire universe? What is the nature of its actual origin? What is the nature of time? What is the nature of beginning? What does this mean? You talk as if you have all the answers here, but I don't think you can really answer those questions. Not convincingly. I think you'd probably say that time is a line, and that future and past are deeply meaningful concepts, that if the line goes into the past, it has to stop somewhere, infinite regress, blah, blah, blah. In other words, I think that you would ignore the entire physical understanding of the nature of time, and the idea that there's anything else to know beyond the modern physical understanding, and especially the understanding within your religion, and insist instead on a simplistic pre-medieval understanding of the concept, and then insist that based on that understanding of reality, you have to be right. And I say I think you do that because that's what you're doing. That's why you're using an argument straight out of Aristotle from more than 2,000 years ago.
A situation in which trillions of galaxies down to Earth itself are all in motion. Incidentally, this is the way that Aristotle, one of the greatest minds in history, believed.
Oh, really? Geez, I didn't realize that was an argument from Aristotle. You want to know what else he believed? Speaking of revolving planets, he thought everything in the universe revolves around the Earth in perfect circles. He thought all matter underneath the moon was made of water, air, fire, and earth, and everything above that was made of ether. He thought the speed of an object's fall is the result of its weight. He thought eels and flies and worms are spontaneously generated. Look, I could go on and on and on about what Aristotle got wrong. Clearly, he was an intelligent man, and profoundly important in the history of philosophy. But he was just a man who lived like 2,300 years ago, something like that, without any of the benefit of anything humans have learned since. It's hard to understand just what a different world someone like that lived in. So he made really lasting contributions to logic, but his ideas about other things were often very seriously flawed, as in completely wrong. So to use the fact that he held an opinion on a scientific matter as one of the first pieces of evidence you bring up to support your position is unwise, to say the least.
Number 7, who started the Big Bang? If all of creation was in that ball, who made that ball go boom? There must be something that preceded the universe and had the power to put all the trillion galaxies into motion.
Okay, that's really just number 6 again, the prime mover argument that you just made. Of course, this time now you have the assumption that it has to be a who and not a what explicitly stated, but that's about all the difference here. But there is something I want to point out here, though. Do you know when the existence of galaxies other than our own was established firmly? Well, basically 1923, but it was announced January 1st, 1925. And that was just the discovery of the closest galaxy to us, Andromeda. If that doesn't put things into perspective, I don't know what will. You know, the religious apologists, they have it pretty good. I don't think they quite understand just how easy life is for them. They can just say anything they want. They don't have to provide any evidence. They can say, this is how the universe works. This is the nature of reality and time and physics. And this is the cause of it all. And I'm right because I say so. It's just that easy. You don't have to do anything else. That's all this fella I'm responding to here is doing right now. Actual science, on the other hand, is hard. Hard as fuck. Making progress takes insane amounts of work, insane resources, and it's slow and tedious and full of dead ends, but it does pay off. And you can see how it pays off by the fact that just 100 years ago, we didn't know for sure that there were other galaxies in the universe at all. And now we take for granted as just something everybody knows that the universe contains billions of other galaxies, and we've seen a basically uncountable number of them through the Hubble telescope. It's been less than 100 years, and now that's just a mundane, boring fact that everybody basically accepts, and that religious apologists like this guy have the nerve to mention during God of the Gaps arguments about things that we don't know fully yet. Science is taken so seriously and is so respected that less than 100 years after the existence of the Andromeda galaxy was established, if the scientific community doesn't know the exact right answer to something, it's taken as completely unknowable and something that we'll never solve. That's how effective it is. But that also goes to show the incredibly unfair double standard. A religious argument can just go, well, I think it has to be this way and so it is. And meanwhile, the scientific side has to have an absolutely perfect and final explanation with incontrovertible evidence or it doesn't count at all, and it all gets tossed in the garbage and ignored. The process of discovery means nothing, only the final answer. And if there's a question that's in the process of being answered that people are working on, you know, the science part of science, but we don't have what the religious apologist considers to be a final answer, then science is worthless and knows nothing, and those scientists are all a bunch of idiots. And meanwhile, the apologist keeps on cheerfully using whatever facts they think are scientifically established to support their narrative. It's a complete joke.
Number 8, colors. We're told that God made a rainbow after the Great Flood. What are the odds that rain droplets can create the exact spectrum of colors?
1 in 1. They do it, so it's 100%.
Did that just evolve from some random events?
Did it evolve? No. It's just a fundamental property of light. It's not evolved.
We're talking about inanimate stuff here. We can't say it evolved.
Why would I want to?
Or is it more likely that the colors were created by an artistic creator who knows the beauty of color?
No, I wouldn't say either of those is especially likely. But if you really want to get technical about it, color doesn't exist in the universe. Color is a label your brain assigns to different wavelengths. That's all it is. What's coming to your eyes is just light of different wavelengths. It's not color. Color is what you perceive. If you want to say anyone created it, you did. And different animals are going to perceive it differently. I read an interesting point recently from Richard Dawkins in The Ancestor's Tale, which, by the way, regardless of what you might think of the God Delusion, personally, I read it like 11 years ago and thought it was kind of meh. The Ancestor's Tale, if you're interested in biology and evolution, is a really good book. I really enjoyed it. But he brings up the idea that because bats tend to use echolocation as their main source of seeing, for lack of a better word, when they're flying, that maybe their brains use similar color labels for what they see through echolocation as we use for different wavelengths of visible light that we perceive with our eyes. Same with platypuses and their electrical sense in their bills. It's an interesting idea, and really it's not far-fetched because, after all, color is just sort of a processing tool that the brain uses to interpret sensory input from some organ. Swap out one organ for another, it doesn't really make a difference. The brain's adaptable enough to use the same tool to interpret it. I don't know, the book was written in 2004. I don't know if any more research has been done on that. Maybe somebody's done some work on that. Maybe it's out of date. I don't know. I know the book was updated in 2016. I did not read the updated edition. Interesting idea, though.
Were those colors inside the material of the Big Bang, I ask you?
No, they're inside your head. But as for wavelengths of light, the things we perceive and interpret using color, they're not things, they're events. They're things that are happening right now. There's no material that's color. There's no color to be in the material of the Big Bang. It's not an object, it's an event.
It's ludicrous to say so. Number 9, the existence of the Jew.
Okay. That's a curveball.
The Byzantine Empire is gone. The Babylonian Empire is gone. The Roman Empire is gone. The Greek Empire is gone. Civilizations don't last throughout history. And all of these civilizations were more numerous and more powerful than the Jewish nation.
Okay, well, I understand that the nations, the empires, the political structures are gone. The Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, which is really just the Roman Empire again. The Greek Empire, which I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm guessing maybe the Macedonian Empire. And the Babylonian Empire, by which I assume you mean the Neo-Babylonian Empire, otherwise known as the Chaldean Empire. The political groupings are gone. I mean, these things don't last forever. The people are still there, though. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's been some changes, but it's not like when a political arrangement comes to an end, the people cease to exist.
In fact, the Jewish nation has been attacked and targeted for annihilation in almost every generation. And yet, we're still here and making a huge contribution to society, even as countries like Iran seek our destruction once again.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's great that you're still keeping on. I mean, the fact is, I disagree with you on religion. I think it's a little bit silly to be a young Earth creationist. But I'm happy to see that your ethnic group and culture and whatnot is sticking around and thriving. I will disagree with you a little bit on the miraculousness of it, though. In history, there really have not been that many broad-scale, focused attempts to outright annihilate this group of people, let's put it that way, for YouTube. I mean, they have happened, obviously. You bring up the Holocaust in a second. And there's been quite a lot of persecution and a number of massacres and expulsions and forced conversions and all these kind of things. Of course. What I disagree with is that there have been so many concerted attempts at annihilation that we would expect it to have destroyed the entire population without the intervention of God, which is going to be the argument. You know, at the start of World War II, it was something like 60-ish% of the Jews in the world lived in Europe. Even if Hitler succeeded at completely taking over Europe and following through on his plan to completion in Europe, there would still have been millions of Jews alive in the world. That doesn't require the intervention of God, that's just math. And furthermore, the reason he was not able to complete that in Europe was not because of the intervention of God, it was because of the intervention of the Allies. And then you were talking about Iran today, I assume you're talking about opposition to Israel, which again, the reason Israel manages to exist is not because of the intervention of God, it's because of its military power and its allies. You know, basically the argument is going to be that all of this is unexpected and really impossible in a non-theistic universe, but it seems easily explained by human decision-making and the details of historical circumstance.
If the existence of the Jew after the Holocaust doesn't prove that there's a God who has the chosen people, nothing will.
Yeah, see, Look, I'm trying to handle this sensitively. I'm not trying to diminish anything. But the fact is, there have been a lot of different groups of people, religious, cultural, racial, and otherwise in history, who have also been subject to very serious persecution, including genocide. And a lot of those groups have survived despite that. I'm not going to bother to name any because anyone can just look up religious persecution or ethnic persecution and start reading if they want, and finish in a few decades. But in none of those cases does it prove to me that there is a God or that it has a chosen people or that those people are its chosen people. And I guess that's all I have to say on that.
Number 10, the creation of a baby. How does a sperm and an egg become a conscious baby who then becomes a full-fledged man or woman? There's too many questions to ask.
There definitely are a lot of questions to ask, and a lot of them have been asked and answered scientifically. I'll let you tell me what questions you want answered, but so far I'm worried that it's going to go like this.
How is baby formed? How is baby formed?
First of all, doesn't it violate the law of conservation of mass that a human being goes from being 0 pounds to being 8 pounds to being 150 pounds? Where does all this new mass come from?
I think I would have preferred how is Babby formed. Do I even need to answer this one? Where does the mass come from for the Babby to become a grown-up? Is anyone confused about this? No, I thought not.
Where does the consciousness come from? Was that in the Big Bang as well?
No, again, you're confusing objects and events. Consciousness is not a thing, it's a process. It wasn't materially present in the Big Bang, and it's not materially present in you either, because it's not a thing, it's a thing that happens. The end of consciousness is not a cessation of existence, it's a cessation of occurrence.
Or was the consciousness, as well as the growth of the baby, given to the being because it has a consciousness of its own and has the ability to create new matter?
Kind of a fucked up sentence there. It's not entirely clear to me what it means, but I'm gonna say no. Is that one of your proofs of God, just asking me if maybe that's how it happened? That doesn't establish to me that that's how it happened. That's just a question. Okay, question noted. You've raised the possibility. Thanks. Good for discussion. And moving on.
Number 11. Universe is larger than the Big Bang material. It doesn't make sense.
Look, I'm having a bit of trouble taking you seriously when you say that, because you don't think it makes sense that an adult is bigger than a fetus. You think the conservation of mass means nothing ever gains mass. What's it going to be this time? Nothing ever gains volume?
In a similar problem, we're told that the raw materials of the Big Bang was very small. It was in a very small ball. The universe, however, is very large. In fact, it has trillions of galaxies.
Yeah, so it basically is nothing ever gains volume. Okay.
No matter how dense that ball is, there is no way it's fitting inside of it a trillion galaxies. It's ludicrous.
No matter how dense the ball is, they won't fit. What if the ball is as dense as a trillion galaxies worth of mass in a ball that volume? Can they still not fit if it's that dense?
It makes more sense that a being larger than a trillion galaxies created a trillion galaxies. Some might call a being that immense God.
This is really interesting. We have the same thing that we saw in that weird Muslim interrogation game show thing, where the assertion is that God has to be physically larger than the universe. I don't know where this is coming from, but apparently this is becoming a thing. It just doesn't seem like a necessary feature of any sort of a cause of the universe. What seems much more important is that it has sufficient, ability to cause the universe. That seems much more relevant than the size of the thing, especially since with God we're talking about something that's supposedly outside the physical universe, which you would think makes physical size something that doesn't even apply.
The first combiner. Who combined everything? Who fused the electron, the neutron, and the proton? Who fused hydrogen and oxygen to make water? Who fused the 4 types of nitrogen bases, adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, to make DNA?
Yeah, I got it. I got it the last time you made this point, and the time after that. Because atoms are so complex, who made atoms was number 1. And DNA is real complex, who made DNA was number 5. Why'd you bother making a list 25 items long if so many of them were just going to be repeats?
Is it logical to say they combined by random events?
No, I mean, I guess it depends what you mean by random, but they combined essentially by physical inevitability. A strong force, weak force, and electromagnetism can't really be resisted. They're gonna form atoms when the universe cools down. And if events occur on Earth that lead to chemical reactions that lead to the grouping of DNA bases into molecules, well, then that's inevitable as well. There was nothing occurring that would stop the chemistry, and there was nobody around to do it.
Or is it more logical to say they combine by purposeful events?
Random is not the opposite of purposeful. There's no dichotomy between purposeful or random. Randomness refers to unpredictability, so if you know the original state of the universe, you should be able to predict the formation of atoms. Kind of in the same way that when you understand water and temperature, you can predict that water is going to freeze into a crystal structure called ice. The formation of DNA molecules is a little trickier. You could say that was an unpredictable outcome. I mean, you need to know a lot more about the original state of the universe, and there's a lot more calculation involved, kind of a nearly impossibly complex amount of it, to calculate from that understanding that you would get planet Earth in particular, and then that you would get all the events on the planet that lead to the correct chemical reactions that lead to the formation of these kind of molecules. And there's probably actual randomness thrown in there, just to complicate things from quantum effects, to make any particular outcome, like this planet will be here and this planet will be there, much more difficult to predict or just impossible. If you want to call that a random outcome in the sense of unpredictable, okay, but that doesn't mean it's unlikely for there to be an outcome like the one we see now. And even if it did, the opposite of unlikely is not purposeful. I mean, you can also characterize the result of 50 coin flips in a row as unpredictable because it's too complex to calculate. It's too complex of a scenario to predict the outcome of. But the mere fact of the complexity of it does not imply that when there's an outcome, someone decided what the outcome was going to be and made it that way for their own purposes. It's just the outcome of a series of physical events that's really, really complex and therefore really hard to predict and therefore characterized as random. And really, I would characterize the coin flip as more random than the origin of DNA because chemistry is really not that random or unpredictable. It's more the getting into the situation where you get that chemistry happening that's the part that's hard to predict.
There's no evolution to fall back on here. These are inanimate objects.
You know, the funny thing is the origin of DNA and DNA replication probably is an evolutionary process. You seem to be drawing some sort of a hard distinction between animate and inanimate objects, and what you fail to realize is that life forms are inanimate objects. Take apart any organism into its smallest component pieces, and they're all inanimate objects. The animation is chemistry, and evolution as a process applies no better to the simplest modern organisms than it would to the simplest early organisms. I think we're ending up here in the same sort of situation as we were in before with the origin of the universe, though, where the question is, hey, scientists, do you have a perfectly firmly established answer to this question that you're totally confident in? No? You're still working on it? You still have some stuff to figure out? Well, fuck you then. God done it. Also, you're not allowed to apply evolutionary thinking to this question because I said so. You have to accept the handicaps I assign to you because I control the game. Can I suggest that maybe you should get all these scientific terms out of your mouth? Electron, neutron, proton, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, DNA. If you don't think science is capable of answering questions in the future, why do you think it's capable of answering those questions in the past? You shouldn't, because you deny the effectiveness of the process and its ability to discover things. That's why you're jamming God into every single place you think there's a gap, where you think the discovery hasn't happened yet, and therefore can't because that means there's nothing to discover. Apparently.
These combinations were made extremely carefully by whoever did it.
This is supposed to be proofs of God, right? So where's your proof of this? You're just saying it. I don't like any answers science has to this question so far. So therefore God. That's all you're saying. That's not an argument. That's just telling me the thing you believe. I know, okay? But nobody's going to take you seriously if you just say, I don't like your answer, therefore whatever answer I make up is right. You have to actually support your answer. You're trying to compete in the scientific arena here. You can't be this ludicrously half-assed and expect it to work.
Someone with that level of care and precision and power at the microscopic level is what some might call God.
Someone with the ability to assemble DNA molecules I would not call God. Not just on that basis, no. I mean, there are companies that do that right now, DNA synthesis companies. They're not gods.
Number 13, a watch. Look at the watch you're wearing if you're wearing a watch. What if someone tried to tell you that the watch was created by random events.
Isn't this basically just the same argument again? I mean, what you just said before was basically the watchmaker argument. Oh, an atom is so complex. Oh, DNA is so complex. Clearly someone had to put this together. What's the difference? It's really the same thing. This video could have just been 20 items, maybe even 15. You should have written these things down and tried to tighten it up a bit.
You say you're crazy, even if you gave them billions of years for it to happen. You'd still say they're crazy.
You know, when I think about it, it's actually worse than I said a second ago. Just about every single one of your arguments so far is something like, some things are done by people, and therefore everything has to be done by a people. Even if there's no sign of there being said person. And in the case of evolution and atoms and planets and colors and ecosystems, Bible stories, the existence of the Jews, how is Babi formed, then even when there's a perfectly good explanation that doesn't require the existence or interaction of some celestial person, then you just jam your fingers in your ears and go la 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 la, because you're trying to argue that it requires that person, and so you're just going to ignore any contradictory information and say, yeah, but somebody made my watch, and so somebody made every other thing because, you know, my watch. QED. What do you mean non sequitur?
You know it was created on purpose by someone who knew what they were doing. So why is the world even more complex than a watch? Any different?
Well, because the world is not a manufactured item. Just because your watch was made in China doesn't mean we can assume everything else was. We have to actually answer that question. The question about the world in some compelling way, which you haven't even tried to do. You've just said what you think about it and made assertions about it and presented nothing to convince anyone else. Meanwhile, the scientific community has actually investigated it and tried to figure out what happened and how, and successfully done so. At least to the extent that we don't have to assume that the Earth came out of Slarty Bartfast's Earth Factory. Which is what you would have us do because ma watch. You would think based on the history of these kind of discoveries, you might be a little more hesitant to jump to your preferred conclusion about the universe. But no, apparently not. No lessons learned, no point taken from anything. Just whatever answer I like is right because my watch came from Walmart.
Number 14, a similar one, a painting.
Are you kidding me with this? This time you even said it's similar. Why didn't you just cut it or roll it into the other one?
Look at a painting in your house. Is it more likely that that painting was done randomly, or is it more likely that it was done intentionally with great skill?
You're making a lot of assumptions about my painting here.
Realize that the painting is just mimicking the outside world.
But it's a painting of a fruit basket inside the house. Are you saying that the fruit was still outside even though it was inside? Whoa, you're deep, bro.
The outside world itself is an even greater painting than any painter could do.
The outside world is made of paint? Wait, so then the reason the painting of the fruit basket is mimicking the outside world isn't because it's a painting of the outside world, it's because it's made of the outside world. Because it's paint! I get it now.
Wouldn't that painter have to be something like God?
Godlike skill, maybe. I've never been so struck with meaning by a painting. You might be right on this one, buddy. I'm gonna have to give this one some serious thought.
NDEs, near-death experiences.
Okay, it's not that extreme of an experience. Come on. But after such a mind-blowing realization, I do feel the need to take a break. So I'm gonna come back for a part 2. Thank you all for watching. If you would be so kind, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. If you really like the channel, please do consider supporting. Even just a couple bucks a month goes a long way. And huge thanks to every one of my supporters who's already made that decision. For early access, sign up to the email list at list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.